Everyone is wrong about Netflix's Cowboy Bebop. This probably sounds incredibly pretentious, and you're expecting me to say that Cowboy Bebop from Netflix is one of the best shows of the year and that all the people who said it was terrible were wrong. And that's not the perspective I have. If you give me a few minutes of your time, I'm going to explain why I think both sides, positive and negative, are wrong about the show and give my perspective on it and how I think show could be better and perhaps does it have a future. So in order for me to get into this, the first thing I need to talk about is my relationship to the original Cowboy Bebop. Unlike a ton of people, I was pretty big into anime in my teen years, and I never really had any deep connection to Cowboy Bebop. I remember it was like one of the big shows that everyone was like, you need to see this show if you like anime, but I put it on, and when I got through it, there was a lot of iconic moments, but personally for myself, it wasn't really a show that I connected on any majorly deep level. I remember thinking the music was really good. I remember thinking the beginning and ending of the show was really good, and there were some great moments throughout. But it was never a show that I really felt personally connected to, and it never felt like a show that I felt was super necessary for me as an anime watcher to watch. I was more of a Space Dandy fan, which, if you know what that is, it's the same creator made a show that's kind of in the vein of Cowboy Bebop, but it's a little bit more goofy and a little bit more out there, and so I feel like that was more a fit for me personally. So I come into this situation a little bit differently than most people because I think the majority of people who are excited about the show or nervous about the show were people who were big fans of the original show. So I don't really have that attachment. So I think for me, it gives me sort of an unbiased eye to look at the show just as it is, not as a product of the original show. And this isn't to say that you can't judge the show based off what you felt about the anime. I think that is a totally valid way to look at the show. I also think it's totally valid to not consider that at all because this is a completely different show. This is a completely different production team. We shouldn't necessarily put the same standards on this show that we put on the original show. But ultimately, I think both of these ideas are slightly flawed, and I'll go into it real quick. If we look at the show as fans of the original, I think the problem is that it colors everything through this lens of nostalgia, that if certain boxes aren't ticked, if certain scenes aren't filmed the way we want them to be filmed, if the cinematography, music, or costume design, as well as the characters, doesn't reflect the way we saw the original show, I think it immediately will turn us off whether or not the show is of quality or not. Conversely, if you look at the show through the lens of let's do something completely and entirely different, what ends up happening is you start to create a product that doesn't even resemble the original to begin with. So if you stray too far from the original Cowboy Bebop name, then what's the point of just calling it Cowboy Bebop? It could be just a random space show at that point. So there's this kind of fine line that I think needs to be rode in between both nostalgia and wanting to do something new. And I think the majority of the reviews that I've seen so far up until this point have fit into one of those two categories. Either they wanted something new and this provided something new for them, or they hated this because it didn't live up to what they felt they had seen from the nostalgic past of watching the original Cowboy Bebop show. So after all of this hype, how is the Netflix's Cowboy Bebop show? Personally, it's okay. It's just average. It's not bad, nor is it good. It's just middle of the road. And I think that this is the review that most people don't want to give because it's much juicier to say, oh, it's this terrible product, and that plays into a certain audience. Or if you say, oh, it's the best thing since sliced bread, that plays into a different audience. So I feel like people usually make these more controversial reviews because they will get better clicks. But the honest truth of it is, as someone who's not a huge Cowboy Bebop fan but does know the lore, it's okay. It's an okay show. and I think that you can break that down to a few categories. The first category would be cinematography. I feel like the majority of the Netflix shows have comparable cinematography, but to say that this is like blowing anyone out of the water would be an overstatement. It's not really that great. It's just comparable. The CGI is actually pretty good throughout the show, and it looks pretty well rendered. But again, this looks like comparable to anything that you would see on The Mandalorian or any other big sci-fi TV show. So it's not really going to be setting the bar or setting the standard for TV. The costume design, I think, kind of fits in this weird realm of both colorful and interesting, as well as too campy. So at points, the characters kind of look a little goofy with how they're dressed, and it seems like kind of like a cosplay event or something like that. But again, the costumes aren't too bad, but they do kind of fit the vibe of what I think they're trying to go for. The main thing I think most people are going to complain about are two issues, which is basically the acting and the story. The acting is all right. It's actually pretty good. I think John Cho is the lead, is pretty darn good. I think that the other two leads are okay. I think that they both have their moments, but they also have their moments where they're quite annoying. I know that the Faye Valentine character has been kind of seen as not very accurate to the anime, and I think I would concur with that. But I think, again, it just depends on what kind of flavor do you want. Do you want something different? Then this would definitely be different. If you want something that kind of fits more in the nostalgia train, then you're not going to be too happy, I think, with the choices made with her character. Finally, we kind of get into the story, which is interesting because it kind of plays it safe in terms of rehashing a lot of the moments that you remember from the TV show, but doing enough different stuff that you're not feeling like it's completely and entirely the exact same scene. One example is the very first episode. Some of the scenes play out in a much different location, different environments, in terms of we have the characters there and you're expecting certain fight scenes to go down, and they don't go down necessarily how they went down in the show. So they have changed and tweaked things in order to fit the Netflix live action model. I don't know if it was just to keep things different or perhaps to maybe service the story in a different way, but personally it seemed like minor stuff was being changed here and there, and overall that stuff, while annoying, especially if you're probably more of a hardcore fan, I think works if you don't know the show that well, because you're not necessarily looking for those little small changes. So I think that Netflix's Cowboy Bebop will be a show that will kind of be with your mileage. If you really enjoy the original and you're afraid they're going to mess it up, you're probably not going to like this. Because if you are that much of a purist of the original, I feel like nothing is going to satisfy you but the original. And I would say just don't watch this. This is not for you, and it's not a show that was really made with that in mind. If you are someone who wants something different, I think that in some way you're going to get that, but in some way it's going to be just a lesser copy of the original. So I just don't think there's going to be a huge audience for those type of people either, because I feel like if you're wanting something radically different, you might as well just tune into a different show. What I would say is this is for the casual viewer. This is for someone who never really watched the original, doesn't really like watching anime, or was too afraid to attempt to watch an anime, but wants to be able to be in the story and know what's going on about Cowboy Bebop. This is for someone who just wants to plug in an interesting sci-fi show that will feel like it has a fresh style if they had never seen the original anime. So I think that's who it is, and I think that this review would basically be mixed. It's a mixed show. I think that, unfortunately, it's not the success that I think Netflix wanted it to be, but I think perhaps the amount of traction they got on it will perhaps give it another season, and I think the best way they can move forward with it, I think the best thing would be to make completely new episodes with completely new storylines. I think that sticking so close to the source material ultimately will only piss off the fans of the original, but if they do new episodes, I think that it could be a little bit more digestible, because it would feel like expanded content that we never really got to see in the original anime. But what do you guys think? Leave a comment below. I would love to know what you think about this live action Cowboy Bebop. It's very interesting, and I imagine there's a lot of people who probably don't like this or do like this. Please flame me in the comments if you need to, and subscribe, and have a good one.